Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror in detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. This story was shared by you/conscious, pass 8816. Something's wrong with Bill and Rob. January 18, 2023. Something's wrong with my friends Bill and Rob. They're cousins, or maybe brothers-in-law, I'm not totally sure. They don't seem like either though, they seem more like old buddies who've known each other since they were kids. Lately though, Bill and Rob haven't been acting right. It's not as if they're not themselves. Bill is still sweet, kind, quiet Bill, and Rob is still funny, excitable, smiley Rob. Bill is just quieter and more tired, and Rob is a bit louder and more excitable. I'm just worried because every time I see them they're like this. They also seem to get more easily annoyed with each other. January 19, 2023. Today I saw Bill and Rob in a shouting match. They've never done that before. Usually their arguments and disagreements are kept quiet and just talked about, but today they were screaming at each other. I don't have second-hand embarrassment from everyone staring at them, far from it actually. I'm far more scared because I thought I heard Bill whisper to Rob, after their fight, that he was going to skin him and wear him as a coat. February 16, 2023. I'm really excited. I have a race soon on the 18th and 19th. I get Friday off of school too to travel up to Priest Lake. I like getting days off of school. I hope Bill and Rob figured out whatever was going on with them. It's kind of scary, them yelling at each other. I think I misheard what Bill said though, he's really not like that. It just wouldn't make sense. February 18, 2023. Bill and Rob are both here, it seems like they're doing better too, mostly at least. I think Bill had another spat with his wife. That happens sometimes. It worries me, though, that Rob seems to be a bit out of sorts. He's less excited than usual, more sad even. Blue isn't his color, but red is. He was wearing his signature San Francisco's 49ers hat. I think I might ask him what's going on tomorrow. February 19, 2023. So I asked, because of course I did. He would only say he's going through a bit of a rough time. I asked if he and Bill were doing okay. He just looked at me and shrugged. Maybe they're not doing so good after all. I don't know what I should do. Anyway, I asked if they were gonna go to the Sumter race in a couple weeks. Bill said sure, and Rob smiled and said maybe. I hope they show up. February 24, 2023. Bill's here, but Rob's not. He said Rob couldn't get the time off of work. That's okay though, 'cause Bill's here. He seemed excited to be at this race. I sure hope his sleds don't break, they have a tendency to do that. February 25, 2023. Today is race day. I'm here with my 78 Yamaha Exciter 340, and I am so ready to win. Okay, so it's the end of the day now, I did the math, and I went around that track 51 times. 6 races. 3 laps in heats, 5 in mains. Oh, and an LCQ. That's double my usual amount of laps. Bill was really tired this morning, he almost didn't go to tech check, which was weird, but I guess he's more old and tired without Rob to keep him jumping around. Maybe that's why he's been getting so mad at Rob, he just doesn't want to run around that much. I'm not sure. I talked to him and he said he'd see me next year, so that's cool. I told him to say hi to Rob for me, and he said he would. So maybe they're doing better. I hope so. Bill's here. Rob's not. Bill's coat looks weird today. It's thin and a weird grayish tan color. It's also got a very gray, fluffy hood. It's kind of a weird hood. It looks like Rob's hair when he puts it on. Bill's still old and tired, but now he's got this weird look in his eyes. I can't pinpoint what it is. He just came up to me. I feel disgusted. He put the hood and Rob's 49ers hat on his head and said hi. He was still Bill, but it felt like he was pretending to be Rob. Oh God. I just looked at the sleeves. They have the fingerless hand things on the end. They look like real hands. I don't think I misheard him last year. I think his whispered threat wasn't a threat at all, it was a promise. I think he skinned Rob and made him into a coat. Second story. This story was shared by you/UniverseMaster on Gram. Wendigo Encounter. By the way, I have posted this here again as it was on my alt-ACC by accident. This is my first post here, but please read all the way through. This is a real telling of what happened while I was on a cabin trip. Also, I'm on mobile, so sorry for bad formatting. A little backstory. I was 13 at the time, and I come from a family of native Dant, and we believe in many things similar to the Wendigo and Skinwalker, like La Llorona, the Whistling Woman and alike. We also have what some call spiritual gifts that allow us to see evil spirits and negative energy. These gifts are what allow us to see these creatures and spirits, as well as being able to have a connection to God and His angels. We had been wanting to go on another camping trip for ages, and after some debate due to some of my nephews catching a bad cold, it was finally arranged. After arriving at the site, it was as normal than any other trip for the most part. Except there was signs of bad luck, a terrible omen, dead birds on the drive, my 7Y brother almost falling outside of our moving car due to a lock malfunction, and during the last few days of the 2-week vacation strange things started happening. Food, drawers, cabinets, doors would be open and random chairs/Tupperware would be missing. But we chalked it up to some rowdy teenagers at the other campsite. Though, we all knew it wasn't just some kids, this was some far more treacherous, but no one wanted to admit that it wasn't as simple as wandering animals or some thieving people. Until some days later, when even stranger things started to occur. Like, hearing footsteps behind us stopping one step after we did, the feeling of being watched, and a strong rancid odor when being completely alone. Imagine feces mixed with hot rotting meat and then thrown into a fire. Although these occurrences were a disturbance, it did not deter us from staying for the final 2 days as we had been planning it for months, but one experience years ago on the day right before our departure, still haunts me to this day. I had been strolling through the forest while looking firewood when I heard rustling in the bushes behind me. As this happened, it seemed that all life ceased around me because I could only hear my heartbeat and the lone heavy footsteps approaching me. Then I heard my name called from what seemed every direction, yet echoed from in front of me while also coming from behind. The voice calling me was a harsh, raspy, animalistic in tone imitation of my sister's voice, who had just recently left the trip due to stress only a few hours ago. This had sent horrendous chills down my spine, so I ran the fastest I've ever had back towards the campsite, while I heard the twigs and leaves crunching behind me. I had finally reached the campsite when the footsteps suddenly stopped. I was relieved and slumped over to the cabin stairs when I slipped on a rock slipping out of the makeshift fire. It had caused me to head straight into it. The blazing force of nature had almost burned my face when I was just stopped mid-fall. I hadn't gained my balance. It was just as if someone was hanging on to me and pulled me back. I'm not sure what it was, but my family suggests that it was my guardian angel saving me from an early death, but after that experience I have never been to the same campsite ever again, and didn't go camping for a few years after that. Still, what really scares me the most from back then was when we had been leaving the site. I looked back from the car window and saw a figure standing at the tree line staring at me. It was lanky and looked starved to the point of having its skin wrapping tightly against its bones. But when I looked onto the pathway, the footprints were completely gone, and as I blinked we rounded the corner and it seemingly vanished into thin air. This has left me questioning what is those woods and was it a reality, but when my sister asked me why I was so shaken I told her what I experienced and her face went pale. She had told me that before leaving a terrifically gaunt figure had been watching us across the river bank, and that it had noticed her and ran away on all four at a fictional speed, she shakily said, staying quite frightened after. Until speaking with a phrase that still haunts me today, before I had left early, that thing had left long, deep, scratch mark on the trail sign. It was the one that it was chased me on. Third story. This story was shared by you/conscious, pass 8816. Something's wrong with Bill and Rob. January 18, 2023. Something's wrong with my friends Bill and Rob. They're cousins, or maybe brothers-in-law, I'm not totally sure. They don't seem like either though. They seem more like old buddies who've known each other since they were kids. Lately though, Bill and Rob haven't been acting right. It's not as if they're not themselves. Bill is still sweet, kind, quiet Bill, and Rob is still funny, excitable, smiley Rob. Bill is just quieter and more tired, and Rob is a bit louder and more excitable. I'm just worried because every time I see them they're like this. They also seem to get more easily annoyed with each other. January 19, 2023. Today I saw Bill and Rob in a shouting match. They've never done that before. Usually their arguments and disagreements are kept quiet and just talked about, but today they were screaming at each other. I don't have second-hand embarrassment from everyone staring at them, far from it actually. I'm far more scared because I thought I heard Bill whisper to Rob, after their fight, that he was going to skin him and wear him as a coat. February 16, 2023. I'm really excited. I have a race soon on the 18th and 19th. I get Friday off of school too to travel up to Priest Lake. I like getting days off of school. I hope Bill and Rob figured out whatever was going on with them. It's kind of scary, them yelling at each other. I think I misheard what Bill said though, he's really not like that. It just wouldn't make sense. February 18, 2023. Bill and Rob are both here, it seems like they're doing better too, mostly at least. I think Bill had another spat with his wife. That happens sometimes. It worries me, though, that Rob seems to be a bit out of sorts. He's less excited than usual, more sad even. Blue isn't his color, but red is. He was wearing his signature San Francisco's 49ers hat. I think I might ask him what's going on tomorrow. February 19, 2023. So I asked, because of course I did. He would only say he's going through a bit of a rough time. I asked if he and Bill were doing okay. He just looked at me and shrugged. Maybe they're not doing so good after all. I don't know what I should do. Anyway, I asked if they were gonna go to the Sumter race in a couple weeks. Bill said sure, and Rob smiled and said maybe. I hope they show up. February 24th, 2023. Bill's here, but Rob's not. He said Rob couldn't get the time off of work. That's okay though, 'cause Bill's here. He seemed excited to be at this race. I sure hope his sleds don't break, they have a tendency to do that. February 25th, 2023. Today is race day. I'm here with my 78 Yamaha Exciter 340, and I am so ready to win. Okay, so it's the end of the day now. I did the math, and I went around that track 51 times. 6 races. 3 laps in heats, 5 in mains. Oh, and an LCQ. That's double my usual amount of laps. Bill was really tired this morning. He almost didn't go to tech check, which was weird, but I guess he's more old and tired without Rob to keep him jumping around. Maybe that's why he's been getting so mad at Rob, he just doesn't want to run around that much. I'm not sure. I talked to him and he said he'd see me next year, so that's cool. I told him to say hi to Rob for me, and he said he would. So maybe they're doing better. I hope so. Bill's here. Rob's not. Bill's coat looks weird today. It's thin and a weird grayish tan color. It's also got a very gray, fluffy hood. It's kind of a weird hood. It looks like Rob's hair when he puts it on. Bill's still old and tired, but now he's got this weird look in his eyes. I can't pinpoint what it is. He just came up to me. I feel disgusted. He put the hood and Rob's 49ers hat on his head and said hi. He was still Bill, but it felt like he was pretending to be Rob. Oh God. I just looked at the sleeves. They have the fingerless hand things on the end. They look like real hands. I don't think I misheard him last year. I think his whispered threat wasn't a threat at all, it was a promise. I think he skinned Rob and made him into a coat. 4th story. This story was shared by you/Miko the Vocaloid. My therapist doesn't know what to do. IF17 have a boyfriend who's M21. I'll call him Jack. Yesterday evening I was getting ready to go to sleep. It was already dark outside, so same as every day my dad turned on the lights in our garden. I was just done switching into my sleepwear when I saw a person standing in front of my window. At first I was really scared and didn't know what to do, but then I decided to maybe try to see who it was. When I was approaching my door, which was a big window at the same time, I saw that the person didn't move, so I opened the door to talk to them. As I was trying to open my door, I recognized the strange figure as my boyfriend. I asked Jack what he was doing in front of my house in the middle of the night, and he stated he just wanted to see me, so I let him in. We were sitting at my bed for a moment and started talking, but then I remembered some Reddit story I saw on TikTok about a man who wanted to let his neighbor in, but he saw the neighbor somewhere else, so he came to the conclusion that the person in front of his door was a skinwalker. In this moment it hit me. This person next to me wasn't my boyfriend, it was a skinwalker. Unfortunately I had already let him in, so I started screaming uncontrollably. My so-called boyfriend was shocked to suddenly seeing me scream like this, and it didn't take long for my sibling 14, my mum 48 and my dad 51 to enter my room. Jack tried to explain them everything, but I screamed my theory about the skinwalker. At first my parents got angry at Jack because they thought he did something to me, but then he explained himself and they started to believe I was hallucinating because I was mentally unstable already. Jack and my mother then decided it was the best to immediately take me to the hospital. On the way there I didn't ever stop screaming because I was so scared for my life. When we got to the hospital, the lady at the reception immediately sent us to an experienced therapist. They all thought I was schizophrenic. We were sent to the therapist's office and the young woman started to slowly calm me down. She told me about how skinwalkers didn't exist and how my boyfriend just looked like one by coincidence. My boyfriend even showed me his phone and ID as a proof it was actually him. As I was calming down I got to an idea though. I told everyone we were leaving for my boyfriend's apartment to prove it was actually empty. The therapist agreed to this as long as she was allowed to come along. When we got there we were looking through my boyfriend's window when in shock we all realized that he was standing inside his bedroom. Now it was my so-called boyfriend who got a panic attack. The therapist couldn't explain what happened, so at that point we were all panicking. The therapist then decided to call 911. We separated so me and my mom were sitting on the other side of the street as my boyfriend and the therapist as we were waiting for the cops. When they finally arrived they immediately told me and my mom to leave and go home safely as this was a special emergency the population shouldn't know about. As we walked back to our car I looked through my boyfriend's window again a last time to check if he was okay, but when I did I saw him grin at me. It wasn't just a normal grin, it was wider and the teeth looked very strange. When we're in the car I saw the police arrest who was the man with me and the hospital. We were driving home when I started rethinking the whole thing. What if my boyfriend was actually with me in the hospital and whoever was in his apartment was the fake Jack? Now I am sitting at my bed in the early hours shaking, hoping for some advice. I tried calling my boyfriend so many times and no answer, not even from the officers. I'm so scared something happened to him, someone please help me. Fifth story. This story was shared by you/one more tired teacher. I found a paper in a drawer that horrified me and changed my life. My husband and I have the best relationship. We have been married for 24 years and counting. He still makes breakfast for me every day and I still tell him I love him every night. We have our divergences, but we work through them as a couple. As a team. It wasn't always like that though. We met almost 30 years ago. I was 19, he was 21. We were madly in love from the start. So much that I thought it would be fitting to change our wedding vows from "till death do you part" to "for eternity." After we had been married for around a year, we started trying for a baby. We tried and tried. Until we learned we couldn't have children. My uterus was the wrong shape, according to the doctor. As in many other cases, this put strain in our relationship. The stress and resentment started to build up on both ends and we started fighting. A lot. First came some small disagreements. Then they started growing and growing. By the end, every small thing would end up in a screaming match. One day, I was doing my stuff around the house and needed to pee. In a hurry, I sat on the toilet without looking. I gasped in horror as my body sank and my butt touched the porcelain inside. I got up and saw the seat was up. I marched to my husband and started yelling at him. Can't you just leave the freaking seat down? Are you that much of a baby? He opened his mouth to answer me, but he just closed it back, closed his eyes and sighed. I need some time alone. With that, he went for the door and left in his car. That night, the police came to my door, telling me he had been in an accident. They said he was at the hospital, in critical condition, and that I should go there as soon as possible. I could not bear my regret. I started sobbing and asked the officers if they could take me there. I was in no condition to drive. They looked at each other and the one by my doorstep said, "Ma'am, this is not standard procedure, but sure, we'll give you a ride." From then on, my memory is patchy. I read that's a normal response to trauma. I remember the doctor saying they weren't sure he was gonna make it. I remember seeing him hooked to all the life support machines at the hospital. Next thing I remember is him at home already. The accident left him on a wheelchair. Because of that, I was now mostly in charge of everything, but he still tried to help. 2 or 3 days after he came home, I remember him saying, "I want to cling to life, and you are my life." From then on, we realized our problems were tiny compared to losing each other, and our fight stopped. We still have disagreements, but we talk about them as a couple. Because of all the trauma and being on a wheelchair, he didn't want to leave the house ever since. I respected his will for years, but at this point, I felt like he really needed to go out. So I booked a surprise vacation for us at a place that is accessible for wheelchairs. Today I was looking for the reservation papers. I'm a bit messy and I lose stuff easily, and I looked in a drawer that I rarely use. I found a paper and checked if it was it. Right now I'm packing. I'm not sure where I'll go, but I'll go alone. My husband asked from the kitchen, "Baby, what are you up to?" And I replied, "Just tidying up the wardrobes." I can't let him know. I mean, how do you tell someone you found their death certificate? Sixth story. This story was shared by you/awa_Mexican. Sweat Lodge Keeper is a skinwalker. I don't know how long I will be on this earth anymore. Sweat Lodge Keeper is a skinwalker. I don't know how long I will be on this earth anymore. My name is Adrian. I am an 18-year-old Native American. I live on the Kihuan Reservation. My favorite sport is lacrosse. I am actually really good at lacrosse. I even played a championship game for my school out on the reservation. My friends, Mason, Dan, and Andrew and I always go to this sweat lodge 4 times a week. The rules in a sweat lodge are very clear and must be followed. You must never talk unless you are asked to speak. Women and men must be on different sides of the lodge. The women must sit like mermaids, never with legs crossed. Only the men in the lodge sit with their legs crossed. It's forbidden for a woman to enter the sweat on her moon time. She must wait until her time is done. All women have to cover their bodies neck to toe, usually wearing tall gowns and long pants. You cannot wear accessories as our first ancestors came with nothing on their first days on the physical earth. As the keeper says, never bring any negative energies inside of the lodge. Every 4 sessions lasts from up to 45 minutes. Sometimes these sweats can be as long as 5 hours. The sweat lodge works by using really hot rocks that have been sitting in the fire for hours. The keeper splashes water onto the rocks, causing really hot steam inside of the sweat. It's dark. When I say dark, it's dark. You literally cannot even see your own hands. Even close up. The sweat has a keeper. The keeper is the one who runs the lodge and sends prayers throughout the world. In my reservation, the keeper's name was Lawrence. We call him Larry for short. I found this man weird. He was always twitching in inhuman manners. He always had coyote pelts, sometimes he would even wear one as a cloak. I never thought much of it at all, I always just thought he was connected to the spirit of the animal. Sometimes his stare gave me chills down my spine, his eyes had no life in them. They just terrorized me. His eyes were similar to that of a coyote, his voice was erratic. But other than this, he was a normal man. I enjoyed his company. He was usually an understanding man and taught me many native teachings and folklore. He knew a lot of teachings I never even heard any elder mention in my life. Lawrence always gave off a weird energy, sometimes the energy felt the same as staring at an animal straight into the eyes at midnight. The bright yellow eyes. Something felt off about him. His pupils were oddly very small, with the rest of the eyes larger. This gave him a terrifying look. His drumming and singing was powerful, his drumming felt like an ocean wave hitting against me. His singing sounded like a ritualistic chant, comparable to a wolf chuffing. If this all doesn't weird you out, sometimes his eyes glow firing red, with white pupils. I've noticed this only happens when he has the skin of a coyote on his back, especially when he wears the coyote. His hands and feet were really abnormal compared to a normal human's hands and feet. They had webs in between the fingers, his nails were similar to claws. Lawrence is a man who lives in a small home on the reservation, far off into the wooded areas. He lives alone, his house was created all by his work. By the way, not to mention his indigenous name is which translates into walking coyote. This name can explain his passion for coyotes. My friends Mason, Dan, Andrew and I are crazy F***ers, we would always whistle after 9 o'clock at night. When we did, I would always hear something running inside of the woods, we all F***king hated the running footsteps. Sometimes we would even get a reply back with whistling, a few times we would hear screams from hell, from quite literally hell. They didn't even sound human, the screams weren't just screams. They were animal-like screeches, they always had coyotes and lynx-like screams. We all were the troublemakers of the reservation, so our names are always known when mentioned. No one says, who, what, when we are mentioned. Except for Lawrence, I don't know why everyone doesn't like talking about him. They all tried to keep Lawrence a secret, only a few people knew him. They were all elders, nobody younger than 40 knew him. Only Mason, Dan, Andrew and I were the only younger ones who knew him. I don't know why the elders would always shush us when we mentioned walking coyote. Right after the sweat sessions were done, I would always help Lawrence clean up the sweat lodge. Sometimes he would invite me to go find rocks in the river for the next sweat. Lawrence and I had the strongest relationship out of Mason, Dan and Andrew. Our sweat is shaped like a pregnant woman's stomach, the materials used to shape the sweat are willow and deer skin. In the winter, the sweat is protected inside of a warm cozy cabin. Yesterday, Lawrence was acting a bit unusual compared to how abnormal he already is. Yesterday, his coyote skin cloak had feathers and coyote teeth as earrings on the coyote's ears. His eyes were even creepier, his pupils were tinier as the rest of the eyes were shaped more circle-like, almost like a goat's eye. Not weird enough, he grew a few inches taller. He called us into the sweat, we all entered the sweat. The spirits are ready, whenever you are, Lawrence announced. Confused as we are now silenced because the sweat has already started. He also announced that an elder is visiting us in the second round, the elder wouldn't be male, he stated. Rather, the elder was female. We never usually had a female visitor. Suddenly, I heard Mason, Dan and Andrew choking. They were suffocating and Lawrence kept on drumming as usual. I got worried and asked him to stop the sweat. He silenced me and told me not to worry because they are going to be safe in the spirit life. He kept on going chanting and drumming, and I finally had realized that Lawrence is a powerful evil witch. I wanted out. I tried to open the sweat lodge door, except Lawrence grabbed my leg and told me not to worry because I am safe. When I sat down, I closed my eyes, shutting tightly. Out of command, my eyes were forced open. I couldn't close them. Damn right, I couldn't even squint my eyes. I saw two eyes. Two red eyes, that glow. The two eyes had white pupils. The second round has reached, the elderly women came inside. It was Kokum, she liked it when we called her Kokum. She greeted me and held my hand, then she went to the opposite side of the room from me. I kept my head down in fear, my body couldn't help but tremble. I cried to myself, because on the second round Mason, Dan and Andrew had just disappeared into the thin air. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I broke the lodge door and ran out of the sweat. I still heard the drumming afar from me. The drumming was getting more aggressive as the farther I ran. The chants were no longer a human's chant, the chant was the sound of a coyote yipping and howling. I ran into the forest, I hid inside of a bush. Suddenly, the drumming had stopped. I heard a blood-curdling scream from afar. I didn't look, I couldn't move from the amount of shock my body handled. I could hear a coyote running, not to mention it's winter. I heard canine-like footsteps running. It was approximately 25 meters away from me, according to myself. The same footsteps me and my friends heard. The coyote was 20 meters away, now 10 meters away from the forest. The footsteps gave me trauma. But then the walking coyote turned the other direction. As I got the chance, I ran out of the bush from the forest. I heard the bastard following me. The thing was taunting me, it would stop for a while, and then it would run again. I ran until I reached my auntie's house. The coyote backed away because my auntie was burning cedar. Skinwalkers do not like cedar. My auntie, worried for me. She knew what exactly happened. She told me I didn't need to explain because she understands. She gave me warm chicken noodle soup, and a piece of baked bannock. She put me to bed. I'm traumatized. The coyote is peering through my window. I am writing this at night. The coyote won't leave me alone. The eyes unsettle me. The eyes are human. The coyote is tall and stands on its hind legs staring at me through the window, not to mention the arms are the shape of Lawrence's arm. My auntie told me to stay inside of my room. I have cedar burning inside of this room. My auntie had told me it's better to stay here, because if I leave the room, the coyote would climb inside of the chimney. It's funny because my window is 7 feet above the grass, and the walking coyote is standing with its hands peering through. My auntie has no neighbors with her. All I can do is sit in my room, hoping I would be saved by someone. Somehow. My auntie tried to contact a medicine man to send spiritual help from afar. I'm staring into Lawrence's eyes as I'm writing this. 7th story. This story was shared by you/The Darkness Diaries. Skinwalker sighting, the haunting of the Navajo Reservation. I've always been a skeptic. Ghosts, aliens, monsters, they were all just stories to me. But after what I experienced in the Southwest, my perspective on the unknown has been forever altered. I was on a road trip with my best friend, Jake. We had decided to take a detour through the Navajo Reservation in Arizona, mainly because of the scenic beauty and the rich history of the area. We had heard tales of skinwalkers, but we laughed them off. They were just myths, right? Our first day on the reservation was uneventful. We visited a few local spots, interacted with some of the locals, and set up camp near a canyon. As night fell, we sat around our campfire, sharing stories and enjoying the serenity of the desert. Around midnight, Jake decided to turn in. I stayed up, mesmerized by the stars. The Milky Way stretched across the sky, and I felt a profound sense of peace. That is, until I heard it. A low, guttural growl echoed through the canyon. I froze, thinking it might be a coyote or a mountain lion. But then, I heard a voice. It was distorted, as if someone was speaking through a broken radio, but it was unmistakably Jake's voice. "Come here," it beckoned. Confused, I turned to our tent. Jake was sound asleep. The voice called out again, this time from the opposite direction. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it towards the source. What I saw will haunt me forever. Standing on a ridge was a figure. It looked like a man, but its limbs were elongated, and its eyes glowed a sickly yellow. It wore tattered clothing, and its skin was a mottled gray. But the most disturbing part was its face. It was Jake's face. I stumbled back, my heart racing. The creature mimicked Jake's voice again, "Come here." It took a step towards me, its movements jerky and unnatural. Suddenly, I felt a sharp pain on my arm. Looking down, I saw a deep scratch, blood oozing out. The creature had marked me. I bolted to the tent, shaking Jake awake. "We need to go. Now," I hissed. As we sped away in our car, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The creature stood in the middle of the road, watching us, its yellow eyes glowing in the darkness. We didn't stop driving until we reached the nearest town. We checked into a motel, and I spent the night researching skinwalkers. The legend said they were witches who could take the form of animals or people, using their voices to lure victims. The next few nights were restless. I'd wake up to that same distorted voice calling my name, and the scratch on my arm seemed to burn and throb. It was clear that the creature had not only marked me but was now haunting my every move. Jake and I decided to consult a local Navajo elder. He told us that by interacting with the skinwalker, I had inadvertently invited it into my life. The only way to rid myself of its torment was to confront it and perform a purification ritual. With heavy hearts, we returned to the reservation. The confrontation with the skinwalker was terrifying, but with the elder's guidance, we managed to complete the ritual. The haunting ceased, but the scars, both physical and emotional, remain. The Southwest is beautiful, but it holds secrets that are beyond comprehension. And I'll never set foot on the Navajo reservation again. To all of you reading this, please, be careful when you venture into unknown territories. Some legends are rooted in truth, and some nightmares are very, very real. 8th story. This story was shared by you/Tbags. I think I had a run-in with a skinwalker last night and I'm afraid it might come back. This entire thing happened last night and I still don't know how to feel about it. I'm honestly still shaken up. I'm afraid that my dogs might get hurt, or even my family. So I've come here in search of advice as to what I should do now. It must have happened around 8-ish, when my mom's girlfriend called me downstairs. She had asked me to help her burn some of the boxes we had lying around in the kitchen so we could clear up some space. We live in a pretty small house, 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom for 5 people. I have 2 younger sisters, one I share a room with, 12, and the other, 10, sleeps in the living room most nights, and we live with my mother, her girlfriend, who is very very mentally ill, mind you, and my dog Kobe, about 2 years old, Valentine, who we've had for 6 years, and their 3 puppies. So there really isn't a lot of room to go around and we could use that extra leg room. So I agreed and we took the boxes out from the house and into the backyard. Our backyard is the biggest in our small neighborhood and is not fenced in. And we are also one of the only houses on the block that has a shed, which is identical to our next door neighbors. Our driveway reaches over to our shed, and since the yard is open they both sort of connect. Anyway, while she was breaking said boxes down and lighting them on fire, I'm not permitted to use the lighter. I was putting Kobe out on the chain to use the bathroom. Don't worry, his chain doesn't reach all the way across our yard and he was far away from the fire, while Valentine is roaming around the yard. The fire goes fine and we burn about 2 or 3 big boxes with no problems. Everything was very under control and we were even having fun with it. Around the end of the fire when the flames had started to fade away, Kobe started running back and forth from the driveway to near where we were, barking frantically and trying very hard to get off of his chain like he was afraid and was warning us of something. When this happened, I also noticed that Valentine was growling in the driveway. So I got up and walked over to him to see what was wrong, and I smiled and asked him, "What's the matter?" in that sort of baby voice. But while I was standing there, I got that feeling. You know, the one where you know you're not alone. I could feel someone's eyes looking right through me. I looked over in the direction of Valentine's barking, and I instinctively yelled, "Oh my God," at what I saw. There was this inhuman-looking thing standing in the driveway only a few feet away from me. Despite having the light from the back door being open and the fire nearby, this thing was completely black. All I could see was its bulging eyes staring right through me, never wavering. It was so thin and tall, standing much taller than the small shed at the end of the driveway. Easily 7 feet tall. And God, I could just feel that something was completely off about this thing. Some voice in the back of my head was telling me, this thing wants to hurt. It's so angry, and it was like me and this thing were having a staring contest. I heard my mom's girlfriend ask me what was wrong and I looked away for just a second, and it was gone. Completely disappeared, but I could still feel its energy looming around. When I told mom's girlfriend what happened, we put out the fire and we brought the dogs inside. I ran to my mom and told her the same thing I had told her girlfriend, and she tried to give me logical explanations to what I saw, but none of them really made sense. She must have seen that I was afraid and wanted to comfort me, but her excuses gave me no comfort. After that, I went up to my room with Kobe and I tried to shake off that feeling that thing had left me with, but honestly I couldn't. I was struggling for a while. I stayed up there talking with my boyfriend for maybe 15 to 20 minutes before I heard my mom calling for me from downstairs. Her and her GF had gotten into a fight and she had locked herself in the bathroom. Mom was fine with it and simply told me to keep an eye on the food while she went to pick up my sisters from their friends' houses. So I said, okay, and went to do so while she left out the front door. Not even 2 minutes later, my mom comes rushing back inside and I hear her walk into the hallway where the bathroom is and say, *girlfriend's name*, there's something standing outside watching the house, and my heart sank. She finally believed me. So GF comes out from the bathroom and says that she had seen the same thing trying to peek into the windows from the bathroom, and she immediately ran to their room to grab her metal bat and she ran out the back door, screaming, "If anybody's out here I'll bash your fucking head in," at the top of her lungs. Regardless of the situation, my mom still had to pick up the kids. So I walked her out to the car, then quickly retreated back inside and grabbed a hammer from the closet. Kobe started slamming himself into the back door, screaming bloody murder out of absolutely nowhere. I had never seen him do anything like it before. So reluctantly I put him on his chain so he could protect the GF while she was on the lookout. While this happened, I hid myself in the bathroom, since it's one of the only rooms in the house with a working lock, and I called my grandma who was at work and told her everything. She's a huge believer in this kind of stuff just like I am. So she listened to what I had to say and tried to calm me down since I was absolutely losing my shit. I am normally a pretty mature and rational person, but I just felt so unsafe and everything felt off. Just when things started to calm down, the girlfriend comes running into the house and tells me urgently that something had broken the basement window from the outside and she was afraid it had gotten into the house. So I hung up on Grandma after saying goodbye, had 911 on speed dial, and we went to check. Didn't see anybody. Searched around the house and nearby and found nothing. It was like this thing was taunting us. The kids and mom came back and still things had seemed to cool down, but I could still feel that off and uneasy feeling. Like it wasn't actually gone. Like it was waiting for the right opportunity. Grandma had called me back to say that she would be taking me to her house for the night, as I'm homeschooled unlike my sisters and it wouldn't be an issue. The kids would sleep upstairs with doors locked, Kobe with them, and the hammer I had from before. Grandma came and picked me up after work, and on the way to her house she told me that while I was explaining all this, the hairs on her arms had stood up and she could feel the negative energy that I was telling her about. Like she knew exactly how I felt when I said something was definitely wrong and unnatural about this thing that was tormenting us. Later on this morning, I got a call from Mom saying that after I left she had invited some friends over to keep her company, ones with conceal and carries, and she had went to grab something from the kitchen, which is where the back door is located, and she heard Kobe's chain rattling outside and something's weight shifting on the back porch right next to the door, when everybody was inside and Kobe was upstairs. I don't know. Laying in bed and thinking about it, I think that this thing was trying to latch itself to the dogs, and that's why Kobe felt the need to be outside. He's been keeping very close to me since I've come home, and I have been very wary about going outside by myself while it's dark. I just came here hoping that someone could offer some sort of advice as to what I should do. I've dealt with paranormal stuff practically my entire life and this feels completely different. If anybody knows what I should do, please reach out or comment on this post. I'm desperate to protect my family. 9th story. This story was shared by you/Northcoast10. I think I encountered a Wendigo. My wife and I have been running the rat race for years, with a family, a house in the city, 2 dogs, a cat, the stereotypical American dream. But the city took its toll, the neighborhood got worse, the crime rose, and we found ourselves looking for a way out. Our opportunity came when I was offered a new job out of state. It was a great career move, but we didn't want to move to a new city just to have the same problems again. So we started looking around and found a great mountain community about an hour and a half from the job, and a great ranch-style house with a big back porch, windows everywhere, and a lot of property. The backyard has a big grassy area, and a creek that cuts the property in half, then acres of woods beyond. It's huge. The house is more than twice the size of our house in the city, it's all updated, and has no neighbors within a mile. It's a radical change from the life we lived in the city, but best of all, it was less than half of what we were paying for our old house. The house was a foreclosure, and when we asked the listing agent about it, she simply said the old family had abandoned the property. We really didn't think anything of it. The first 3 months were uneventful, with us settling into our new life, the kids getting used to the new school and new friends, and most of all, us getting used to the big house and property. But then the weather turned cold and things started to get weird on the property. It started with noises from the back property. Things we chalked up to being in the woods, then the motion lights around the house started going off randomly. Once again we just chalked it up to being in the woods. But last night, it all changed. Last night was the most terrifying night of my life. One of the dogs was at the back door whining and scratching. I assumed he needed to go to the bathroom, so I grabbed my flashlight and walked out the back door. Instantly something felt off. The dog bolted for the back property, growling and snarling. It was a cold night, about 30 degrees, but the dog plunged straight into the creek and out the other bank, running off into the woods in the back of the property. Flashlight bouncing, I ran after him, calling his name. I got to the creek and made my way across the makeshift bridge, trying desperately to follow him. I could hear the dog still growling and barking from somewhere up ahead, and I pushed further away from the safety of the house and deeper into the woods. That's when I heard it. A shriek like I've never heard before in my life. It was a mix of a moaning wail and metal on metal. It echoed through the trees and then froze me in my tracks. My dog bounded its way back to me and cowered down behind me. I turned around and could just make out the warm glow of the house behind me, and the cold dark ahead of me. I swung my flashlight around wildly looking for the source of the noise. And that's when I heard an even more terrifying noise. Out of the cold silence, my wife's voice floated all around me. "Babe," the voice called out. I whipped back around and could just barely make out the image of my wife, safely inside our house. The voice called out again. "Babe, I'm right here," came the voice from deeper into the woods. Then came another voice, just as clear as the other. It was my dad's voice. "Come out here," it called. I swung the flashlight around again and this time caught the briefest glint of light bouncing off of eyes. The creature was in my beam of light for barely a second, but it was tall, maybe 6 feet, and ashen white. It had long spindly fingers that grasped the trunk of a pine tree, and then it was gone. I turned back and ran towards the house. I ran headlong into the icy creek and stumbled. My dog ran past me, making it back to the yard and up to the porch. I dug my hands into the freezing, muddy bank and pulled myself out, not stopping to look back. When I reached the porch, I scrambled inside. My wife ran over to me, asking what had happened. I just shook my head. I'm not certain myself what happened. I had a growing sense of dread tonight as the sun began to fall. We kept the dogs inside, and I haven't dared to look out the back. But as I sit here typing, one by one, my motion lights in the backyard keep going on. 10th story. This story was shared by you/group. I received an emergency alert while ice fishing. The emergency alert on my phone went off with a shrill noise, repeating 3 times and vibrating angrily, just as I was bringing the last of my belongings into the cabin. I took the device from my pocket and stared at it in disbelief for at least a minute before the realization set in that I would have to leave, only moments after arriving. My hands were shaking from the cold as I read through it again. Severe weather alert, heavy snowfall in the Frontenac region is expected to begin tomorrow. 60 to 80 centimeters of precipitation. Not good. I realized the roads would be impassable by this time the following day. That meant I would have to leave early the next morning to avoid being stuck on the roads in the blizzard. Which subsequently meant 0 ice fishing time for me. I'd be lucky to make it home before it started coming down in earnest. Moments later, messages started coming in from my 3 friends who had planned to join me. The group chat notification popped up on my phone and I opened it. Matt, did you see the emergency alert about the storm? I guess the trip's off. What a bunch of bullshit. Ted, OMFG. A generational storm is what they're calling it now. Looks like we'll have to postpone for a few weeks. I hope you didn't go through with your plan to go up a day early, Jay. Greg, no kidding. What are the chances this blizzard hits on our ice fishing weekend? I messaged back, saying I understood we'd have to reschedule. I told them that I'd made the trip up alone, accompanying the messages with forehead-slapping emojis. It sucks that I'll be stuck up here alone, I thought to myself. My dog, Gibson, pawed at my leg and I smiled at her, feeling slightly reassured by her presence. Yeah, you're right, Gibby. I'm not completely alone. At least, I've got you here with me. After putting down a bowl of water and another containing kibble, my next priority was to start a fire in the small black stove at the center of the main living area. There was wood stacked up in a neat pile next to it and small bags containing kindling which we brought with us in the summer and left behind. At first glance it looked like a large enough stack, but I knew from experience I would need twice as much as it appeared to make it through the night, so I went outside to gather more from beneath the boathouse. The family cottage was a rustic one, to put it mildly. There was no running water, no electricity, and the cabin was poorly insulated. Perennially procrastinated repairs were needed in more than one place, including the floor beneath one bed which had partially collapsed, letting in a slight trickle of cold air from outside. It was drafty and I could hear the sounds of mice which had made their way in through the gaps, burrowing in the bedroom and finding their way into an old coat or a sleeping bag that someone had left behind. I sighed as I lit the kerosene lamps which were scattered on wobbly tables around the main living area. There was something about having vermin in the cottage that set me on edge. But at least Gibson's presence would keep them at a distance. After filling the place with a warm flickering glow from the half-dozen kerosene lamps, I felt a little better. There was reassurance in having fire, and I started working on making a big one in the stove that would keep me warm through the night. I loosely wadded up some newspaper and then stacked dry kindling on top, making a teepee. Over that, I added larger pieces of wood, until it was piled up to the ceiling of the small stove. Then I lit a strip of cardboard and held it up to the paper inside, catching it alight from several places, watching as it began to burn, and then flared up in a bright, white-orange glow. Holding my hands up to the fire, I watched it and warmed myself up. Eventually I took off my boots and my coat, the entire cottage gradually getting toasty. There was no sense unpacking, I thought, taking a beer out of the cooler and opening it. I took a sip and couldn't help but grimace at the taste. I'd never tried the brand before and I'd picked it up on a recommendation. It was awful. And lukewarm to boot. Par for the course considering the trip so far. I took out my phone and watched Netflix while the beer went flat beside me. I lifted Gibson up onto the futon with me, so that she was off the floor, and close to the fire where it was warm. Eventually I got bored of office reruns and called it a night, adding another log to the fire and reminding myself to wake up in an hour to keep it going. Pulling the futon even closer to the stove so that it was as close to the fire as safety would allow, I curled up in my sleeping bag and drifted off into an uncomfortable slumber, constantly tossing and turning, trying to stay warm but not succeeding. I woke up to the sound of whining coming from Gibson trembling on the bed beside me. I was so cold that I was actually scared. My teeth were chattering uncontrollably and I realized a few hours had passed. The fire had gone out completely, reduced to mere embers at the base of the stove. I put on my jacket and blew hot breath onto my fingers, pulling Gibson closer to me. She was shaking badly as well. My hands were trembling as I put more newspaper and kindling onto the fire, blowing into the embers and hoping they would reignite. My lungs felt frozen and my heart was beating fast, my skin prickling with pins and needles turning into total numbness in my extremities. I'd never felt so cold in my life, and realized it was far beyond the weather forecasted on the news. It seemed like it was -30 degrees, and steadily dropping further. Terrified that I would not be able to get my body temperature back up, my mind started racing, thinking of worst-case scenarios. If I couldn't stop shaking pretty soon, it would be impossible to start a fire again. I recalled that my truck was just outside, and I could get in there and start it up, turning on the heat until I felt warm again. But the idea of getting out there and the truck refusing to start was too much to take. And considering the state of the beat-up old Ford, that seemed like a distinct possibility. So I continued stoking the fire, blowing on the precious few embers and adding more newspaper every so often, until a tiny flame had begun to grow. I held my shaking hands up to the measly fire and added pieces of kindling sparingly, one by one, terrified of it going out again. Pulling Gibson closer, we shared each other's warmth and I began to feel half human again. A sound came from outside the cabin suddenly, startling me and causing me to jump, my heart skipping a beat then pounding faster and faster in my chest. A noise like fingernails being dragged across the siding could be heard from all around, echoing in the small space. Something was going from one end of the cottage to the other, attempting to get inside. Deep, guttural breathing could be heard, grunting and snorting, desperate as it scraped its talons against the boarded-up windows. Gibson began to whine, making high-pitched noises as she huddled closer to me, and I put my hand over her muzzle, muffling her sounds. Was it a bear? I wondered, and realized I was holding my breath. I thought about the holes in the flimsy facade of the cabin. The spot beneath the bed where mice were getting in. I thought about the broken screen door and the wooden one behind that which needed to be replaced, almost falling off its rusty hinges. The entire cottage felt so frail and insecure all of a sudden, as I heard the loud noise of whatever that thing was, breathing heavily just outside, trying to get in. Maybe it was too cold out there even for it. The ground shook with the weight of the creature as it made its way around the cabin. I was so focused on it that I didn't notice the fire going out again at first, as it fizzled down to embers. I continued holding my breath until it was gone. And then I relit the fire, my shaking hands barely able to get it going again. Once it was burning hot, I didn't sleep anymore. I pulled Gibson close and the two of us stayed up all night watching the fire with weary eyes, taking occasional glances at the door. Even once we were both warm, we continued to shiver. When the sun came up, I didn't notice at first. It was dark in the cottage 1 minute and then it was light. I blinked my eyes a few times and rolled out of bed, deciding I would waste no more time before leaving. I just hoped the bear or whatever had been outside the night before was gone. Gibson was scratching at the front door, asking to be let outside to pee, which told me it was probably safe now. In the light of the morning, all that had happened seemed like a bad nightmare, and I told myself maybe it had been. Until I got outside and saw the claw marks which marred the exterior walls. Shuddering, I threw my belongings in the truck, doused the fire with too much water, and took one last look at the place. What a shitty weekend this turned out to be, I thought to myself. With more people around, it was easier to keep the fire going, taking turns feeding it with wood so that everyone could sleep through the night. But it was frightening being up here by myself, even with Gibson by my side. I'd never done it before in the winter and I never would again. There were too many things that could go wrong. A freak snowstorm, a fallen tree blocking the road, getting stuck or going into a ditch, and those were just the beginning. I wanted to get out of here before any of those things happened. The truck didn't want to start at first. I turned the key in the ignition twice, hearing only a click and the absence of any engine noise. Cursing loudly, I checked to make sure I hadn't left an interior light on, or something which could have drained the battery. Satisfied there was still a charge, I tried one more time, and finally the old shitbox let out a cough and kicked into life. The engine began to sputter, before finally settling into a steady, rusted purr. "All right, Gibson. Let's get out of here," I said, rubbing the dog's head and smiling as she blinked her eyes. She looked content in the front seat, happy to be back in the truck and out of the old cottage. There was a thin layer of snow on the gravel road, and the tires got moving easily enough. I looked up to see the sky was turning gray above me, and a few white flakes were just beginning to fall. The weather was making an early appearance. I turned on the radio and sure enough they said the same thing I was thinking. The storm would be arriving early. By noon, the highway would be a parking lot. Whiteout conditions. Be prepared to be trapped in your car. Have emergency supplies ready. My anxiety was through the roof as I went around a bend in the road. Hitting the gas, I came to the first big hill and went over it, seeing something strange up ahead as I came over the rise. Whatever it was blocking the road. Massive and brown, the lumpy, furry shape got bigger as I pulled up in front of it. The bear which had been trying to get into my cottage the night before was dead. Lying in the middle of the gravel road and blocking it completely. At first I thought it had frozen to death. I got out of my truck to inspect it and was surprised to find there was a horrible smell coming from the carcass. It was a chemical smell, noxious and unpleasant, like some sort of factory waste. The snow had melted all around the beast, and blood and entrails were pooling around the far side. What the hell could do such a thing? Aren't bears at the top of the food chain? Alpha predators? Gibson was by my side, but she did not venture near the body. Usually she would be curious, trying to sniff at something like that, but she stayed next to me, emitting a low growl. The road was completely blocked, I realized. There was no way out. Not unless I could move it. But no matter which way I attempted it, the giant body of the dead bear would not budge. It weighed a ton. There were large trees on either side of the road, too close to drive past. There was only one other way out, which was by driving across the frozen lake, and that way was risky. I hadn't been able to test the thickness of the ice yet. It would need to be nearly a foot deep for me to feel comfortable. But there was a clear way on and off the ice, if it came down to it. I got back in the truck and threw it in reverse, since there was nowhere to turn around. I felt sick to my stomach, nervous with anticipation and fear, uncertain of how I was going to get out of here. Once back in front of the cottage, I got out of the truck and went down to the ice with my spud. Walking out onto the lake, I cleared a spot with my boot and began to dig with the sharpened metal rod. Satisfied that I'd found the bottom of the ice, I put the tape measure through the hole, hoping it would be close to a foot. Looking at the tape measure, my heart sank. The ice was barely 7 inches thick. Just below the minimum 8 inches where it would be safe to drive a vehicle across. And my truck was on the heavier side, I would feel more comfortable if it was a full foot thick or more. I pulled out my phone and checked for a signal, deciding it was time to call someone for help. Who I would call, I still wasn't sure, but I knew I couldn't get out of this jam by myself. Of course, I muttered out loud, seeing the signal bar was down to 0, and the words, "No service," were printed across the top of the screen. Surely I would have gotten another severe weather alert by now, I realized, had it not been for the total lack of cell signal. Because snow was now being dumped down on me from above, and the sky had turned nearly black with the approaching storm. I typed out a message in the group chat, telling them my situation, hitting send regardless of the lack of signal. I knew from experience that it would go through eventually. I just hoped it would be sooner rather than later. Gibson let out a loud, high-pitched whine. Her tone rose in volume and she began to bark. High, persistent yips that were totally unlike her. She backed away, then let out a stream of urine, her hind legs trembling as she did. I looked up from my phone and saw what her eyes had spotted. Across the lake, something was moving in the trees. I saw fingers wrapping around a tree trunk, too high up, the nails too long and too sharp to be a person's. Whatever this giant was, it looked similar to a man, but it was massive. It peered out at me from between the boughs of trees, its head probably 15 feet off the ground. Its skeletal limbs matched the monochromatic tone of the birches on either side of it, a gray, pale white shade. I couldn't distinguish the entire form of it in the shadows, but I could make out its eyes. They reflected back at me, catching the gray light coming through the clouds. And then I saw its mouth spread wider in a grin, teeth dripping blood, and it disappeared back into the darkness. The temperature felt like it had dropped to 30 below freezing again, as I began to shiver involuntarily and looked down to see Gibson was doing the same. There was only one choice. Only one place where we could go. The cabin. It was either that or risk plunging the truck into a frozen lake, attempting to drive across. We were on a small peninsula, surrounded by water on all sides, only one way in or out. And that way was blocked by the body of a giant brown bear. I took the dog back inside the cottage and locked the doors, taking uneasy glances outside through the cracks in the boarded-up windows. What the hell was that thing in the forest? I asked myself over and over again. But no answer would come to mind. There was no creature I could think of that was 15 feet tall, with reflective eyes, which stood on two legs like a man. Capable of disemboweling a full-grown bear. Capable of causing the temperature to plunge all around me. There was only one creature capable of that. And it wasn't supposed to exist. It was something from myth and from folklore, from legends that aren't supposed to be real. It's a Wendigo, I said aloud, immediately regretting the words, as if saying them made it true. As if saying them would summon it. Wendigos are supernatural creatures born of Canadian First Nations folklore. They live in cold, remote places, and make people go mad merely through their presence. They thrive on the hunger, despair, and loneliness of their victims, who usually live in remote communities. They drive families apart, instilling urges of cannibalism in people and making them want to consume their own loved ones, during the lean, hard months of winter. They turn people into raving cannibals, driving away all their loved ones. And then, once you're alone, the Wendigo strikes. It either consumes you while you're still alive, tearing the flesh from your bones while you beg and scream, or it turns you into one of its own kind. But the Wendigo's greatest curse is that no matter how much flesh it consumes, it only grows hungrier. With every ounce of meat it takes in, it grows taller and more emaciated. Its hunger grows more insatiable with its height, until it is a towering beast with its head amongst the treetops as it roams the forest, constantly searching for its next meal. Gibson whimpered and burrowed her face into my armpit, as if hearing my inner thoughts. Trying to reassure her, I stroked her fur and told her it would be okay, although I had a feeling it wouldn't be. I tried to get the fire going again, but it was a fruitless effort. Everything inside the stove was damp and wet, and I scolded myself for dousing the fire with so much water. Still, I kept at it, knowing we might be stuck there for a while. Pretty soon the wind was howling and blowing outside and the snow was piling up in front of the door. I made a point of opening it every so often and clearing the front steps, knowing that I would need firewood, taking weary glances off into the forest across the lake as I did so. Finally I got the fire started, a low, guttering flame in the stove which wanted to go out all the time. Everything was damp, but I kept feeding fresh kindling into it, nursing it until it kept going by itself. Hours passed as we waited to either run out of firewood or be attacked by the creature. We were running low on kindling and the sun was beginning to set, my stomach rumbling with hunger, when I felt something strange. The ground was suddenly shaking beneath my feet and I heard Gibson whining from beside me. "What is it, girl?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat as I realized the answer. It was the creature. It was back. The dining table began to rattle and bounce up and down as whatever was outside got closer, and I imagined the huge creature lifting the roof from the cabin like the cloche on a dish in a fancy restaurant, picking me up and eating me whole, like a wriggling shrimp. A second later there was a sound at the front door of metal being ripped and sheared as I realized the creature was making its way in. The screen door landed on the ground with a crash and then the wooden door was being torn from its hinges an instant later. Cold air rushed inside as Gibson began to let out shrill, panicked barks of terror. I heard the thing tearing apart the front entrance, easily ripping apart the wood and making the doorway larger so that it could come inside. I tipped over the dining room table to use it as a barricade. I picked up a chair, the only weapon I could find nearby, thinking I would throw it at the thing's face to defend us, when I heard a strange noise from out front. It was a car horn honking. Someone had come to save me. I heard a loud ding and pulled out my phone and saw the green check mark beside my group chat message, indicating at some point it had gone through, at some brief moment when there'd been a gap in the clouds. Reading the one new received message on my phone, a hopeful smile spread across my face. Matt, you just had to skip town a day early and go ice fishing, didn't you? What the hell is that thing? Ted was yelling from outside. I don't know, but it's trying to get inside. Jay. Are you there? I shouted back that I was. There was a loud screech from outside which I realized had come from the monster. They'd actually wounded it somehow. I ran to the front door with Gibson and looked up, seeing the creature for the first time. It stood with its back to us, its head among the treetops, even taller than it had appeared at first. My friends had caught it off guard, but now it was fully aware of them, and it was going after them. The Wendigo was distracted by something in front of the cottage, and I realized one of my friends had gotten out of the car and they were using themselves as bait, so that I could flee the cottage safely. They had driven across the ice with their lighter vehicle, just as I had hoped to do. I guessed that they'd also run into trouble moving the body of the giant bear which blocked the road. Jay! Ted screamed out the window, driving the car in circles on the ice, as if too terrified to stay still. I raced over to the car, slipping and sliding on the lake ice. It was Matt who was distracting the Wendigo, I realized, and I called for him to get away from the thing. It was too large and too fast. He didn't know what he was dealing with, but that was Matt. He was always the act first, think later type. Not only that, but he often put himself in harm's way for his friends. He turned to look at me and gave a thumbs up, his attention diverted from the creature for a split second too long. As Gibson and I got into the car, we heard his screams, and I looked to see the Wendigo had closed the distance in an instant, and was picking him up like an insect, turning him and taking bites from him in places. As Matt screamed for help, the creature peeled off his skin, exposing his skull as he ate his face. The calls for help turned to bubbling gurgles and wet, choked sounds, and I nearly got out of the car to run after him, but Ted grabbed my wrist and pulled me back inside. You can't save him, he said with wet, red-rimmed eyes, and eventually I relented. We raced away across the icy lake, making a path through the blizzard, cutting a swath out of the fresh fallen snow on our way back to the main roads. For a while we debated what to do. Should we call the police? Our friend had just died after all. But we knew that if we did we would be considered suspects. And with no other reasonable explanation, they would pin the death on us. They would say we killed him. There was no box you could check on an official police report, citing a Wendigo attack, after all. Such things didn't exist. They were myths. Legends. As it turned out, we wouldn't have to worry about it. A message popped up from Matt on the group chat just a few minutes after we got home, and I had to tell myself it wasn't all just a nightmare, hallucination from the cold and from lack of sleep and food. But Ted and Greg both told me I hadn't imagined it. What we saw was real. As much as I wish it wasn't. The three of us read the message on the group chat again and again. My heart was beating fast and a sick knot was growing in my stomach, bile rising in my throat that I could taste inside my mouth. Matt, hey guys, you really missed out on a feast. Ice fishing is just as much fun in a blizzard, if not more. Let's reschedule the trip for next weekend, okay? I'll be waiting for you here. As much as we don't want to go, we've resolved that we have to. We can't leave Matt like that. We have to help him. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.